Kamen Rider and Super Sentai crossovers are amazing. Both franchises are so similar, but also very unique in their own distinct ways, so seeing them interact with each other is always such a treat. I remember watching the movie Kamen Rider X Super Sentai Superhero Taisen, and there's this awesome part towards the end where all the Rangers and Riders are doing battle, and they're teaming up based on which seasons had aired in the same year. It's an awesome sight to behold, especially if you were watching both shows in real time. But that got me thinking. These team-ups were done based on the airing years, but what if the team-up was based on their actual concepts? Like, if each Sentai team had an appropriately correlating extra hero in the form of a rider, which team would have which rider? That's what I want to dive into today. Basically, I'm going to answer the question that maybe some of you have thought of before, but I definitely have been thinking about for the longest time. Which Kamen Rider would belong to which Super Sentai team? For this fun little deep dive, I'm going to be assigning riders to Sentai teams mostly based on either the concept, visual aesthetic, and maybe story elements. I will unfortunately be excluding Showa Riders for this activity because, in my opinion, they are all pretty similar, and it's not until Heisei that rider gets more wildly diverse. I also admittedly don't know the Showa Riders as well, so if you want to do this activity with them, let me know how you do it, and let me know what you think of these team assignments and if you change anything. But without further ado, let's Ranger and Rider up. So matching these riders to Ranger teams was a medium-ish level task. There's been a lot of crossover in terms of themes between Rider and Sentai, but there's also been some crazy one-offs on each side as well. The connections I draw to link each rider to their respective team varies between kind of obvious to kind of a stretch, so I'm going to organize them based on how much brain power I had to use to assign them. We're going to split these assignments from pretty easy for ones that are not too difficult to find the connection, big brain for ones that require a little bit more mental cognition, and galaxy mind for ones that I felt I had to get super creative with. Let's start with our pretty easy category. First up, we have Kuga going to kingohger. The reason I put Kuga here is because they both rely on some ancient powers that are also both bug-like. Kuga himself is based on a Kuwagata, so he and Gira could work well together. The stylization of the glyphs and stuff match up pretty well too, and Kuga can use his Titan form to join in the sword-slashing fun. Ryuki I'm giving to Goseiger, and you may be thinking, why not Ryusoldier? Because they are all knights. Well, Ryuki's other strong aspect is his card gimmick. I see a lot of similarity in their card powers and could also see them fighting side by side quite naturally. Gosei Red is also dragon based too, so Gosei Red and Ryuki can be fast friends. Next we have Blade going to Jakka, and yes, this one is kind of weird because of how old Jakka is. Aesthetic wise, they definitely do not match, but the playing card suit theme is probably the strongest and most obvious thing that connects these two together. So yeah, not thinking about that one for much longer. Den-O is going to our Imagination Nation, ToQger, for obvious reasons. They share a very common and prominent theme in their trains. This reason is obvious enough, but I think Den-O's form switchability could go well with how the ToQgers tend to trade trains too. Also, Imagination, Imagine, come on! The passing through rider decade is going to our intergalactic seafaring Gokaiger. Not only do they both traverse different universes and dimensions, but their staple power relies on switching through the entire rider and ranger roster. So even though Tsukasa and Marvelous have clashed before, this one is a no-brainer. For double, I've assigned the Special Police Deca Ranger. This one is pretty obvious because the Deca part of Deca Ranger is referring to detective, and who better to put in their ranks than the hardboiled detective of Futo himself. I also think it's fun that both double and the Deca Ranger teams have some sort of line design down the middle of their chests. O's I've given to Zyuohger, and yes, I know that Gal Ranger is probably an equally expected assignment because of the animal themes. Heck, we've had a decent amount of animal themes. Go watch my other video about that. But what makes Zyuohger a better fit is the style. Not only does a cubic aesthetic kind of go with O's circular theme more, but I think design-wise, the prints on their chest match the symbols on O's as well. That and their Instinct Awaken powers match well to O's embracing his own animal abilities. Uniting the Space Fam, I'm giving forwards to Q Ranger. This one's pretty obvious, they're both heavily related to space as their main concept. I think Lucky's Yosha Lucky would pair well with Gentara's Uchu Kita. There's not much more I can say about that really. Slicing up next is Gaim, joining his sword with his fellow samurai, Shinkenger. This one is also quite obvious, with the samurai themes uniting them. The rest of the Gaim riders aren't exclusively samurai, but he is, so that's a pretty solid placement with the Shinkenger team. Geo is going to the Time-Breaking Squad Time Ranger. Not much to say here either, both their concepts deal heavily with time and such. His power-ups are going to seem a lot busier than anything they can show off, but it's okay. I didn't think about it that much, and neither should you. The Flaming Sword of Saber goes to Ryusoldier. Yes, Saber instead of Yuki is going to the Dino Knights, mainly because of how important the knight and sword aspect is to both of these series. Saber definitely fits much better with the Ryusoldier team in my book. Or should I say, ride book. Our Dino Duo Revice I decided to hand off to Kyryuger. Now, I know that Revice's powers are not exclusively dinosaurs, but I think in their base forms, Revi and Vice can go well with the Kyryuger squad, mainly because of their teeth. And that's about it. Ka-ching! Alright, let's put our thinking caps on for this next category with big brains. Agito was a bit tricky for me because I tried to think of what part of this concept I could relate to a Sentai team. In the end, I relied on visual aesthetics and gave them to Die Ranger, really for the only reason being that I think their designs work kind of well together. The crown on Agito and the golden faces on the Die Ranger helmets blend together well, I think. And Agito and Re-Ranger are both dragons, so it's even better. Let's go with that. The Five-Face Fives joins the Shape-Face team of O-Ranger. You may question why I made this association, but this one is also based on a piece of their visual aesthetic. Fives and the rest of the riders in that season have their visors made of Greek letter symbols, and the O-Ranger squad have shapes that are intended to allude to ancient civilizations. And in a way, both of their masks are symbols derived from ancient civilizations. So yeah, they can be friends due to their fun faces. The Game Boy Xade was a difficult one to place at first because there's never really been a Sentai like this at all. However, I thought about it again and it just clicked to give him to Dawn Brothers. I mentioned before how the AR game aspect of Dawn Brothers is often overlooked, and that's the connection I decided to draw here. Xade and the rest of the riders literally bring the game to life, and that's exactly how the Dawn Brothers don their avatars as well. That, and also both Xade and the Dawn Brothers team are some of the most ambitious and silliest designs we've seen from each franchise. I think they go well together. Kabuto was interesting because I initially wanted to give him to kingohger, but Kuga is really the better fit for that. Kabuto, while insect-based, also leans into some fantastical, modernized technology that imbues him with his power. After some deliberation, I decided to give Kabuto to Gohger. The Gohger team combines their animal concepts with vehicles and the theme of speed, and as the soundtrack states, Kabuto is the Lord of Speed. They also don't have an insect representative, so he can be their resident, fast, buggy boy. Drive can park himself alongside the Car Ranger crew. I had a lot of candidates to assign to Drive because there are a lot of vehicle-based Sentai. At first I was thinking to give Drive to Gohger, especially because they share a tire aesthetic, but I think Kabuto and Gohger just go better together due to the animal-machine hybrid. At the end of the day, I did settle on Car Ranger because Drive and Car Ranger both feature some aggressively car-like helmets. You could argue that Turbo Ranger does as well, and well, Turbo Ranger and Car Ranger are very similar to a degree. But Car Rangers is more in your face about it, much like Drive's overall design is. Heck, even their wrist changes look kinda similar. For Geats, I decided to give him to Lupin Ranger versus Pat Ranger. Now, this is interesting. Why did I give Geats to the team who is basically two teams? Well, the Lupin Rangers and Pat Rangers are always fighting with each other to find pieces of the Lupin collection. Geats, as a player in the DGP, is fighting with other riders to get the best power-ups to win the game. To me, both seem like they had a sense of treasure hunting, and Geats in a way embodies both teams with the fox-like elusiveness of a thief and the tactical force of a cop. I even think Geats fits with the aesthetic of the VS Changer as well. So Geats joins their treasure hunting brawl. Play nice, you guys. Our Kamen Riding CEO 01 I gave to the company of Go Busters. This one is kind of interesting because they both sort of represent super high tech in their own space. That's why I decided not to really focus on the special operatives aspect of Go Busters and instead focus on the technology of the Buddy Roids. Both the worlds of 01 and Go Busters have a focus on the self-automated technology, so I think that as a theme can connect the two. Plus, they both have hyphens in their name. Ha! Just kidding, that's not a reason at all, but both of their elements of greater technology link them up together nicely. Not perfectly, but nicely. Alright, for these next few rounds, I'm gonna need you to find the dial on your thinking cap and switch to full force, because here are some assignments that gave me a bit of trouble, but nevertheless, I think they worked out. Okay, I'm gonna need you to brace yourselves for these two. You would think that Wizard would go with Magi Ranger, right? Well, I'm here to tell you, no. That was originally my placement for our Magic Boy, but then I ran into the issue of Kiva and where he would go. So ultimately, I decided to put Kiva with Magi Ranger due to the mystical and supernatural aspects of each. It was really hard for me to find a Sentai for a Vampire Bat Boy to find a home, and this one was the best one I could think of, especially when they have someone like this in the show. So what of Wizard? Well, if not Magi Ranger, then he's gotta go to Kira Major. Kira Major has a couple of themes, magic and gemstones. Well, Wizard's magical powers come from his rings, which bear, you guessed it, gemstones. Even though both Wizard and Magi Ranger share a spell-casting bond, I think Wizard and Kira Major share a likeness that isn't obvious at first, but makes sense the more you think about it. Both Wizard and Kira Majors draw their magic from their respective stones, and that, I think, calls for a stronger connection. Trust me. Build... This one was very difficult. I wasn't really sure which aspect of Build's concept I should focus on. Like, was there a Sentai where bottles were used as a gimmick? But then I decided to lean into Sento's smartness and focus on science. Therefore, I gave him to 5-man because their focus was education and martial arts. And at the end of the day, that's what Build was about, right? The blazing romance, friendship between the genius Sento and the fearsome fighter Banjo. So yeah, this is really the best connection, but I'm gonna leave it at that for now. The demonic Hibiki was difficult to place. You know, I had a few places I thought he'd do well in. One thought was Deca Jam and Red's Jamingers so Hibiki can beat his drums along with the rest of this musical crew. Another team I thought he'd blend in with is the team from the 2017 Power Rangers movie. Aesthetically, they go kinda well together, having a more organic feel than most other suits. But that's not actually Sentai, so I decided instead to give him to Hurricaneger. They connect with their both very uniquely Japanese themes, and also literally because they have the Ninja Misen, a stringed instrument weapon that fits thematically with Hibiki's drumsticks. I think they look great together. Don't you? This leaves me with my final 2 difficult placements, Ghost and Gotchard. Let's talk about Ghost first. God, this one was actually really difficult. The closest motif Sentai has had to Ghost was probably Magiranger and their horror type villains, but I already went through so many loops to justify giving Magiranger to Kiva. So maybe the Ghost aspect isn't what we lean into. Well, aside from that, what else is really defining of Ghost concept? His jacket? Nah, there's really no one else that has a jacket besides Go Busters and maybe Gokaiger. The icons? Well, you know, maybe this is a step in the right direction. Thinking about Ghost spiritualness, I kept thinking summon spirits of the earth. Then it hit me, Gal Ranger. The Rangers of Gal Ranger draw their animalistic powers from the spirits of the earth and the creatures that inhabit it. Ghost gets his powers from the spirits of iconic figures throughout human history. By joining arms, Ghost represents the transcendent power of humanity, while Gal Ranger represents the fearsomeness of the animal side. So in a way, they draw from the spiritual power of the world as a whole. And the Gal jewels are circular like the icons too. So this is an incredibly rough connection, but it's the best I could do. Now, what of our card-slinging alchemist Gotchard? Well, let's break this one down. His gimmick is card-based, the concept is alchemy, he's got some snazzy goggles, and he has a desire to find his true gacha. Well, we are already out of card-using Sentai, so we can't really use that. Plus, the cards are more TCG-based anyway, so the connection we made with Ryuki and Goseiger already fits better. I can't think of any Sentai that has a concept remotely close to alchemy other than magic? But our Ranger Magicians have already adopted their rider, so they're out of the running. The weakest connection I wanted to make was to Kira Major, literally only because Kira May Silver has goggles too. But the Shiny Stone Squad is already with Wizards, so they're spoken for. This one is a bit of a toughie. So, you know, I think I leave this one up to you. Which Ranger team do you think Gotchard belongs to? Let me know what you think. Anyways, that's it for this video where I played Family Matchmaker with Riders and Sentai teams. Would you have done any of these assignments differently? Let me know if you would have taken a different approach. Thanks again for watching. I'll be back with some more interesting Toku topics to Toku talk about. See you next time.